But just in case some of you aren't familiar with X and her background, I just want to tell you a few things about her. She was born in Coolaman in New South Wales, raised in Canberra, where she continues to live and work. X loves Canberra. I love talking to her about Canberra. And while studying fine art at Canberra School of Art, she became immersed in the capital's punk and experimental art scene, reflected in a practice encompassing performance, installation, and photography. And she was involved in tattooing. I think she's still involved in tattooing, a subculture replete with its own language of signs that continues to underpin the complex iconography of her work today. And de Medici, she's of course very well known for her watercolors. And I think, I showed a number of watercolors there at the end of that talk. And X and I have talked a lot about how watercolors are one of the best medium in the history of art. And but at the time that she started working on watercolors, they were seen as fairly conservative and still are in some, not for us though. So since that time, the issues addressed in her work have broadened to include the ongoing impacts of colonization, political and economic power, the voracious and reverberating effects of global capitalism and human greed. So there's a lot to unpack and think through in these works, apart from the relationship between art and science. But first, welcome, X de Medici.
Thank you, Andrea.
Such a pleasure. So great to have you here. And we need an image behind us to get going. I think one of the first things I wanted to talk to you about is something we spoke about yesterday. And this is just a glimpse of the final room in the exhibition where we have this gorgeous pink hue coming through, and the experience of the space is a little bit different than the first three rooms of the exhibition, which are a little bit darker. But I think the first question I wanted to ask you and think about with you was the idea of looking and how to look and why we look. And for me, your work involves a microscopic and telescopic vision at the same time. And I wondered if that makes sense to you, or if you see that in your work, or what you think about this idea of close looking and why it matters.
I'm quite fascinated with the premise of scale, that every artist, and I think musician and writer, anyone involved in making, has a concept of the scale of things, and every individual has an individual scale as well. And I tend to think I work at sometimes 5 times the original object that I might be working with. In terms of the moths, it's hundreds of times the scale. I work directly through a microscope. But in so I could use one really good example with that particular room here, is there's a moth that's about 2.5 millimetres, it's about 4 millimetres wide.
Do you want me to flick to?
It's the coal drill.
Oh, I don't think I have that.
The roller cone coal drill.
Is it in this suite?
It's in that room. It might be on the other side. So the animal itself is 4 millimetres wide, and the coal roller cone drill bit is about half the scale of this room.
Right.
So, I think that idea of playing with scale is humorous for me, but also that part of my discussions with Marianne Horak, who I've worked with at CSIRO for 23 years, is that pretty much all the specimens I work with have no classification.
Yeah.
They might have a general classification to a superfamily, but they're unnamed. Often I work with specimens that come from mine sites where they've done a collection before the mine has been sunk, and they've never been allowed to go back to reassess whether those animals still exist. So in this country, we're a vast biodiversity system, And we don't even know, given that we have a deep proclivity to turn our country into the moon, that we have a deep proclivity to kill things and to wipe out enormous amounts of things we didn't even know existed before they have gone.
Yeah.
So all of the species I work with have no name. So in real terms, they still exist as viable within the premise of scientific illustration because they have not existed openly before.
Yeah.
They're micro-lepidoptera, so you can't see them with your eye. You can only see them with the aid of a lens. So they actually still function as functional within scientific ideas, that you're describing a brand new species never seen before.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my work is taught at Newcastle University, which is the only scientific illustration course taught. And they put my work up because it's not properly scientific.
Yeah.
So, you know, if they were truly scientific, there would be I would count how many segments there were to an antennae, and there would be exactly that many segments in the antennae. I don't do that because that would drive me insane. I mean, it drives me insane enough. So I'll work with the basic of what I can see. So when I first began at the CSIRO, I was missing entire structures because I didn't know how to see them. And so I think when I did the first couple, one of the other mentor taxonomists I've had in there, Ted Edwards, who sadly passed away last week, said he stood there and he had a look, and he's very dry and very conservative and incredibly knowledgeable. And he said, oh, you've forgotten this, you didn't do that. And I'm just going like, that's not there. And he goes, have a look.
Yeah.
And as soon as he told me where to look, there it was.
Yeah.
So it's that thing where you're looking and you're not seeing until someone points something to you that it is there, it exists.
Yeah.
So that's been a big takeaway for the whole period I've worked with the animals in there, is that you get taught by these people about what and how to see something. So as an artist, I was seeing something, but I wasn't seeing what was there. So it's a fascinating moment of how selective your eye can be.
Yeah. And everything you're saying there points to so many compelling things about your practice. The nature of collaboration that you engage in, you know, you and I have talked about this idea of you learn to see when you draw, you know, even if you're not great. You know, I've told this to art history students before. They always say, I can't draw. I'm like, you can. You can draw.
Everyone can draw.
Everyone can draw, and thinking things through that way is important. But I'm really taken with this idea that the scientist pointed out something, you're like, oh, what? I didn't see that there. But it
was also, why didn't I see that?
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty observant.
Yes.
And we're trained to observe when you do life drawing or you do any form of representational drawing or any aspect of your training. And that is what you're trained to do. Yeah. And I didn't see it. And I thought, wow, that's telling.
I also think, I mean, this idea of classification, and your titles are so clever and often give these clues as to what you're seeing, or not necessarily what you want us to, but, clues and ideas and things percolating there. And so it's almost like there's the X classification system, something like that. And you give identities and lives to these unnamed things. And when something gets named, that means something, but here they're named in these hugely evocative, almost like you use historical characters, you use, Vincent van Gogh, you're making a reference to the verdigris, I just wondered if you could talk about that a little bit, because I think it's one of the most compelling things about these moths and guns and how they're named.
Well, there are two parallels at work in all of the moth work, and They have been there since the very beginning. So in the show, Samantha included my very first study group, which was a funded, OSCO-funded year to be able to just sort of sit in the CSIRO collection rooms for that year. It was very, very modest funding. And so if you were to look at the collection as a whole, that is referenced and used as a living collection, well, as a dead living collection, by scientists from every country on this earth in a continuum. It is a place of enormous activity. The collection room for the Lepidoptera alone has over 13 million specimens. And so there are scientists coming from South America, Indonesia, Japan, the Gondwana, South Africa. It's in a continuum. They're always visiting scientists, accessing that collection for their own work that they're doing in their own country. So it's a discourse of evolution is actually what goes on in their taxonomy as the tracking of the earliest to the most current version, evolutionary version of that animal. So what I did was, from the get-go, was to pair the very fast, so the animals, the moths are incredibly ancient and arrived around the time of the conifers. So these are some of the oldest animals in the world, and as pollinators. And their process of evolution is deeply complex, like particularly with Gondwana land, because particularly between New Guinea and Australia. So most of these specimens are New Guinea specimens, paired with an Australian specimen of the same genus, the same animal, but separated by literally millions upon millions of years between the 6 land bridges between Australia and New Guinea. So it wasn't just opened and closed once, it was opened and closed 6 times. So every time it opened again, those species would recross into each other. So they're incredibly complex genetic mapping is going on between us and the other Gondwana countries. So I wanted to match the very slow evolution of these animals, of the natural world, natural selection for their survival, with the very, very fast evolution of human-made weapons. So there are 2 evolutionary groups that are sitting. So the weaponry always sits at the point of reproduction, which is their abdomen. So most of my specimens didn't have an abdomen when I got them. So I replaced them with the super fast evolution of a human problem. So that's sort of, I guess, in a bit of a nutshell as to why the weapons and the animals are joined.
Juxtaposed. As you can see, Extra Medici is a wealth of, your research is impeccable, and you're so knowledgeable about these, the moths, and your reflection upon which ones to gather together and why. I would love to ask you about the idea of the notion of like hybridity, what you were just talking about, in terms of cross-pollination, and of course, when we look at these, there's an element of things are happening that shouldn't. A gun is morphing into a plant-like structure. The moths take on hybrid forms in and of themselves. Is that something you reflect on in this at all? And I mean hybrid in the most positive. I love hybrid. I think it's interesting, Yeah, I
think it's, for me, often, that hybridization between the weapon and the animal, the natural world and the human world, we are at odds with the natural world. And there is no doubt that we are going to causing its entire destruction. And so I always figure, to be silent about that is to be part of it. So I will continue to talk about these things because my silence means that I don't agree with how we deal with the other world, which has no rights. We're the only ones that have any rights on this planet.
I mean, I was so lucky to write an essay for this catalog, and I think one of the things I said in there was like the insects are politicized and the guns are like aestheticized. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's right.
And like that's what I think about when I look at this joke. But also the way these are, you know, isolated out and treated almost a still life way. But then, so what I meant at the very beginning with that, like microscopic plus telescopic, is that you also have your larger scale works, which are so intensely horizontal and teeming with, you know,
stuff.
all this, like sort of this, and that was what I was thinking about
stuff.
with the cabinets of curiosity, and just but there are relationships in here that are, you know, you can stand in front of one of these watercolors for hours just working it out. And actually, I had a prof of art history who, you know, we asked, you know, how long should we look at what we're studying? He said, I don't know, 3 hours more. Like I say that to my students, they think I'm nuts, but you could do that here. You could absolutely just stand there teasing it all. So you have the microscopic vision and the magnification, but then you also have that like pulling back and considering everything in this totality that
they were originally meant to be quite vertiginous. I wanted them to
Right.
feel like you felt a bit sick looking at them, like they made me sick to make them. But I also did 2 research trips to the Rijksmuseum in Holland before I began any of this work. This was the work literally just post the Howard election.
Right.
And I made a very, very distinct decision that I was going to turn my gaze elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that I would make things that, well, primarily I began with the thought that I'd make the most conservative thing I could think of, and which was to make a still life.
Yeah.
And a watercolour, which is, you know, shameful. Shameful in the contemporary art world. It is, you know.
Because what year is this one? Is this a moment when a lot of people are doing sort of performance art and more, you know?
I can tell you something I saw distinctly that really made me do it, which was, it was at the Sydney Biennale, and it was a giant room full of garbage bins that they were brand new. They'd been bought from a distributor, obviously, because there was tons of them. And someone had just laid the boot into the side of each one of them. And that's all, that's it. And I just went, oh, I hate that.
I'm going to do something technically.
I wanted to make something at that time that required skill as well.
An incredible skill set here. And your observation of all of these different objects. I mean, there's countless drawings, I'm sure.
There were.
Yeah.
But it was also, I think I told you yesterday, I'd never done a watercolour, and I went to my old senior lecturer from the School of Art in Canberra. Before it was ANU, it was the Canberra School of Art. It was a separate entity. And I asked him, I said, you know, how do you do watercolours? And he goes, well, X, there's a TAFE right down the road there for you to go and learn that from. So it gives you an idea about that, you know, that hierarchy of form that exists still in the art world. I'm always attracted to really low-grade forms, or forms that the art world think are really rubbish, like scientific illustration, like tattooing, watercolour, the still life, all these things. I always figure, why are they so hated? And I'm going to have a look and see why. Yeah. Why is this? Why? And clearly I think this comes from a very deepish history with the English rules of connoisseurship, where an oil painting of a historic moment is worth infinitely more than a Maria Sibylla Merian observation of nature. So I think, you know, as a woman artist as well, you know, I'm sticking pins in here constantly, but I think that's kind of a fun thing to do anyway. But yes, I'm kind of attracted to things that aren't perceived to be real.
It's so true what you say about that hierarchy of art, though. I mean, that was so entrenched by the salon system in the 18th century. Like, history paintings up here, and like a still life is down here, and that carried, or landscape, you know. But so I think that did have a hangover for a really long time.
I think it still has.
Yeah.
I think we're still in a hierarchical situation.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to consider potentially that abstraction now occupies the place of heroic painting,
Yes.
of heroic history paintings.
Yeah.
So abstraction sits as this kind of holy place at the top, and that's all well and good, you know.
Or you think about the art market where like old masters used to be here and now it's contemporary. You know, there's those shifts and oscillations.
Correct.
And I think you're someone who doesn't give a hoot.
I don't give a hoot.
You know, you just have resolutely followed your path and have a remarkable, like, this autonomy that you have that, you know, you've never compromised, is my sense.
No.
Yeah.
I think I did compromise once. And that
I don't believe you, actually.
No, I did. And it's in there. It's in there.
Which
was...
That's homework. Find it. No.
Yeah. I did something for money in there.
Right. Oh, I know what it is. Yeah. I shouldn't say that. I know exactly.
Of a subject that didn't appeal to me at all. So, yes, if you go in, you might see it. I won't nominate it.
I think also with, you know, these two works in particular that, you know, I'm really fascinated by. I mean, this idea of consumption, and, you know, there is this sort of critique of capitalism built into so much of what you do. And that idea of like the more you consume, the less you live, or something. That's kind of a motto I feel a lot of times when I'm looking at your works.
Well, with these two particularly, pretty much everything in both of them is worthless. They're worthless objects. So in red, you know, I'm pretty sure I put a KFC packet in there. Because I was sort of interested in the fact that Colonel Sanders was the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in Kentucky, and I call Kentucky Fried Chicken KKK chicken. So I thought I wanted to put that reference, even though it just looks like a stupid piece of fast food packaging, but it's in fact a much deeper problem going on in KFC chicken.
Yeah.
So everything in these pictures is worthless. Now, if you were to look at the history of still life painting, is that those painters were commissioned to exemplify the ownership of very expensive objects that only one class could afford to have at their disposal. So part of that is that nothing is of any worth at all.
Even as a conglomeration, but it's seemingly dazzling.
It looks a bit like
it. And the way sorry, I keep flipping everybody, but like the way it almost looked like a kind of shellac, like, it's just glossed or something.
Yes.
And
but worthless at the same time. It employs the strategies of what you discussed of the cabinet, the Wunderkammer. But there's nothing of anything. It's just rubbish. And I wanted them to be like big, beautiful constructs of rubbish at the get-go. But then contemplating also the relationships between these things, was that sort of something that, you know, how they're related? Or, I mean, I find when I look at your work, I always find something new on each viewing, a new symbol that kind of comes out, and then I'm thinking about it as in rapport to another thing, just as we do with those older elements where, like, a dried plant is next to, like, an exquisite watercolor. So it's these weird kind of relationships that are seeping through there, so the red one was a bit of a discussion about corporatisation. And that fox is Rupert Murdoch.
Oh, that's excellent.
It's not a taxidermed fox, it's Fox Network. And I wanted to be,
so good.
You know, of the predators amongst us. Including, like Monsanto, with glyphosate, which is now getting closer to being determined as a very serious carcinogen. that everybody is just splashing around in their gardens. So there are lots and lots of clues and cues, and it was also, I'd just start with one thing and then people I knew would just say, oh, I found something red for you, or I found something blue for you. I didn't just get any object and paint it red. That every single thing was red, or a tone of red, and the same with blue. So blue started as is my colonisation picture. I am part of the colonisation process. My family is, both sides of my family. I rarely ever discuss anything to do with myself, but I thought at the time I made this that the premise of colonisation needed to be discussed. And so there are a lot of cues in this picture about Norfolk Island, where both my parents share a common ancestor, and she was interned on Norfolk Island, so which was perceived as the only place of terra nullius in this country, and the colonisation process. So I feel like I can feel a lot of guilt about being part of the colonisation process, but it can be alleviated even slightly by the fact that it was a terra nullius area of a territory of this country. Guilt easing is a big moment for this country, I think, or facing it. And I felt at the time I made this, so this was 1998, I think, was when I made that one.
It says 98, 2000.
Yeah, it took me 2 years to make these works. Because, again, I had no idea about how to technically achieve these things with a water-based pigment. I have since discovered that you can make a lot of mistakes with watercolour and no one will know. They're not unforgiving. They're not that unforgiving. If you want to be a purist, they're quite unforgiving.
Yeah.
But, if you want to have a play with it, you can do anything you want, like everything else.
And this is another one where the title is quite clever. Bauer.
Yes.
Two different spellings and that relationship to...
Fernenbauer.
Yeah. And the blue bower bird.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which gathers together all things blue.
Some species. Other species gather green and white.
I did not know that. See? Every time I'm with you, I learn. I love that. And I also love your openness to different readings of your work. Like, I feel like I've had a couple of moments where I said, I think I see this. And you're like, yeah, maybe I understand. And that's wonderful, because I think the art goes in the world and then...
And you have no control over it.
Yeah.
Yes, I figure I've got 100% control when I'm making it, and I relinquish 100% control after it's gone.
Yeah. I think we should see if our audience has any questions for you. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. It's like blinding up here. Georgina over there. Hi.
Hi. It's so lovely to hear you speak thank you. It's so lovely to hear you speak together and to gain a sense of the artist behind the work. When I just listening to what you're saying, I get a sense of kind of like a grief and an awareness and a frustration of the realities of our world. And I think I can certainly relate, when we feel that way, we can either let it consume us or we can do something. And I feel when I look at your moth, for instance, this laborious practice is sort of akin to icon painting. This sort of putting of oneself and one's energy and one's will into something for it to become empowered with an idea or a wish or a kind of manifestation of what we perhaps hope it to be or become, but also at the same time like a requiem and an honouring and a ritual kind of goodbye in a way, like when you talk about the mind sites. That kind of then makes it become a symbol of something that's even more powerful than what it is in real life, like we see in superhero kind of manifestations of contemporary culture. But I wonder, you've been doing this for a long time, this very methodological kind of very time-consuming, considered practice. And I wonder how it has affected you as a person, the practice that you have, and how it has shaped you throughout the course of your life.
I tend to sit in the shadows a bit, and it's a place I like. So I guess it gives me a reason to sit in the shadows, because they take a long time to make, and they require a space where I can actually work at great length, and to be able to, I think it's only beneficial. I believe it's probably just only enhanced my shadow life, I guess. But I've been doing this for a very long time, but a big part of it is that I want it to be clear that I care about what I'm talking about. Care enough to pay attention to every single aspect of it. And I always hope that that's a primary thing that is perceived by a viewer, is that I care about them viewing it as well. So, they're my proof that I was alive.
And also perhaps the impact of your work as showing us how to see, and when we talk about seeing and your at sometimes distortion of realism, how in traditional Chinese paintings the work becomes a mind print or a seal of the heart. And when we look at that work, we're not seeing it in its realism, but we're seeing the artist and the way that they are and the way they see the world.
Oh, Chinese scholarship in painting is extraordinary, but when I've been to some of those mountains that those scholars painted, and they look just like that. Yeah. They're really, really amazing. And they're really tall, huge, unbelievably high, covered in tiny little giant pine trees. They really are like they look. But the intent of the scholar is yet another level by which I have no perception. Personally, I'm not a Chinese scholar. And my intentions are obviously different, but I've read a lot about Chinese scholarship in painting. But when I went to those places, it was like, wow, that's exactly the same. It's like photo, but not.
It was shocking to me too, and even though you go why am I surprised? But yes, thank you. Yes. It's lovely to hear you speak.
Thank you.
Other questions? See here.
I have quite a loud voice. Firstly, I'm the lady who approached you yesterday. I'm Colleen. We were chatting when you were outside.
Correct, yes.
Oh, thank you. What myself and another one of my friends are curious about, in Red Colony, what is it's sort of like a tape measure? Are they lottery tickets? What are they?
They can't. That's a very specific thing. That ribbon comes out of it came out of an object from our family. My father's father, was a professional gambler, and he was a track bookmaker for his brothers, who were trainers and racers. And it comes out of the odds box. So it was a wooden box with wooden pegs on the side, with ribbons that would change the odds. And so when our grandfather died, he had his odds boxes, and I used them. And I think part of the reason I used them was because of corporate behaviour is gambling. They gamble with our lives, they gamble with nature, they gamble with our banking, they gamble with everything. And so I thought to drape the entire scene with the odds was a kind of an interesting thing to end it with.
Thank you.
Other questions? Right here in the middle. It's hard to see up here, isn't it?
Yeah, the light is piercing.
It's like we're in interrogation. Police.
Also, like, I still got another question about your moth works. So
Sorry?
the moth ones. So like they got a patterns mimicking like the weapons or nuclear weapons. Like they showing really like a big scale, really like violent threat. But also the lifespan of like moth is really short, really fragile, and vulnerability there. So like how you feel between them to the threat and the fragile? Are you painting a big scale moth to create a new threat, or just a specimen of human changing the nature to leave a mark, and they gonna have new threat coming again? Like,
Well, again, the abdomen, the place of reproduction of the animal, is replaced with a place of human destruction. So I've reserved all of their abdomen, where the abdomen would be, with this idea that they're two separate ideas, the animal and the weapon, yet in the place of reproduction comes a place of destruction. So there are also nerve gases, molecular nerve gases. So, the scale, again, of what the abdomens are doing is completely mutable. So again, it could be a cold drill bit or a molecule of mad cow disease, which is on the Trump moth, by the way.
Right.
Or Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily meant to be a binary between hard and soft. It's just about two parallels of evolutionary development. That's really the primary motivation. So two separate paths of one of life and the production and reproduction of life, and one for the human proclivity for the production of death. So it allows me. It's a bit like, with poetry, a lot can be said with very few words, and so I feel I wanted these singular moths to be able to say a lot, but using very simple, basic structures. So I think they actually say more than they seem to say. But that's, to me, it might mean nothing to someone else. I can't control that. But it's not necessarily about the binary. It's about putting together two ideas of two evolutionary pathways. One human, one the natural world. I think we've become more and more separate to the natural world as time has gone on. I don't think we could be considered to be part of it anymore, in fact, because we treat it as an enemy.
oh, thank you. It really answered my question. Also, I wonder about like how the weapons, they are just being wrapped with decoration of the pattern, but the moth is actually changing itself.
Well, often the animal looks exactly like its landscape. So with this one here, that comes from grasslands. So it lays its eggs on grass. And so when it's on the grass, it looks like grass. So often the pattern is not just a random thing. The pattern is a reflection of the landscape where it reproduces. So they all look, a lot of the New Guinea specimens, they look like the jungle. They're bright green and purple, and, they reflect those really sort of hot colours of the tropics. And many of the Australian specimens are they're brown. I figure I worked almost 2 years with brown, and that was really hard. Brown can be very, I know everything about brown now, but But so the animal, the patterns on those wings are literally reflecting the landscapes they're from, rather than just being sort of a random pattern that emerges for no reason. But it's all part of the natural world and camouflage.
Gosh, we haven't even talked about your skulls. Like there's so much happening in the show. I'm just thinking we haven't got, but I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
I was just wondering, this one? Sorry. I was just wondering, how much of what you do now, or the technical skill that you now have, was influenced by your tattoo work?
Oh, they're intricately entwined.
Do you think that you could be doing what you do if you hadn't done the tattoo work first?
Oh, of course. It would be, the work I did before tattooing was very, very different. And so it was much, I come from a very particular school of teaching. I came from a modernist school in the Canberra School of Art. And so European modernism was the entire basis of the syllabus, or the entire structure. So I was, in our workshop, you weren't meant to make beautiful finished things. And if you did, that was not very good. So it was much, I guess moving into expressionist forms, of which I've never been comfortable with, quite frankly. But tattooing is work in miniature. You must finish everything. You can't just go, oh, I'll just leave that bit there because I'm sick of this. I don't want to do any more of it. Because that person will come back to you and say, look, you didn't finish it. Like, finish it. So it gave me some extremely valuable lessons in completely finishing every aspect of that surface. So miniaturisation, working with miniature tools, finishing off, polishing, became inherent. I have never attempted to separate my work in tattooing with my other work. Early on, I was made to feel a bit shameful about the fact that I did tattooing because it was so on the nose. It's now, just everywhere. I did walk away 20 years ago from, I do only what I want to do with tattooing these days. I have a health department approved studio and a private studio. It's a very different thing to the years it took me to learn. But I've never wanted to have numerous lives. I've always wanted to have one. And so, of course, the tattooing made its way into the work. So I don't separate things.